more than anything, it was just hiding from the issues. I mean, I didn't directly address it. I certainly would never have discussed it with my friends and family if it was ever brought up. I'm the only person in my family who ever brought it up. Dad. It was a guaranteed blazing row within 20 seconds of it even being raised, because I would have just got up and walked out, or he would have got up and walked out. I just wasn't comfortable addressing it at all. Right. And my friend kind of knew. They kind of formed. I was always very lucky. I had very good friends, I must admit, and I had a pretty good circle of friends with being and spending so much time in bars. Because obviously there's the ones that work there and people who sort of habituate in it. And I was very lucky with them, but they knew enough that they wouldn't really mention it. They also warned people off mentioning it to me, because they knew I would change the topic of conversation, and if someone kept mentioning it, I would just cut them out of my life.
Slimming Storage is branching out. I've created a Facebook group, and over the next couple of months I'll be building a community, starting with live Slimming Story conversations. This is your opportunity to feature on one of the upcoming podcast episodes and share your weight loss journey. Are you with me? All you need to do is just click on the link in the podcast show notes or search for Slimming Stories within the group feature on Facebook. I would love to see you there. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Slimming Stories. I'm your host, Claire Oldham West. I'm so excited for today's guest. Honestly, when I first started doing the podcast, I never in my wildest dreams would have thought that I'd be interviewing a guest that has lost over 21.5 stone. I'm sure, without even saying the name, if you're within the Slimming World community, weight loss community, wherever you are, I'm sure that you've probably heard of my next guest, Phil Kaye. Phil Kaye is from Belfast, and he's done the deed. He's lost over 21.5 stone, totally transformed his life. And I mean, the weight loss, the dedication, can you imagine the self-talk that he would have had to give himself on a daily basis just to get through every moment on those scales and to chip away through those stones to get to his goal weight. But it did just that. It did that. And, you know, it's a phenomenal amount of weight to lose. No doubt you've seen him on the magazines. He's a Slimming World member, but he's also appeared on media for Good Morning America. I mean, my goodness, that is an amazing thing. And has recently also appeared on BBC Nolan. So that was really good too. I think you'll all agree that wherever you are today, wherever your mind's at with your weight loss and fitness journey, whatever obstacles you think are in your way, please just listen to this episode. And when this podcast is produced on a Sunday, the Monday morning comes around, you know, those Monday mornings where we're like, right, okay, this is a week, I'm going to get it together. This is a week, I'm going to get my focus together. You know, what excuses can we give? What excuses are we giving ourselves on a weekly basis to say that we can't do this? That losing, whether it be 1 stone, 5 stones, 10 stone, isn't possible, because Phil has absolutely smashed it. He has smashed down every wall in terms of any story that you could tell yourself about not being able to achieve a goal, because he's done amazingly well. Here's introducing Phil Kaye to part 1 of his slimming story. Enjoy. I just want to start by asking about your relationship with food. So I understand as a binge eater and somebody that's, you know, used food as a comfort for many years, that this doesn't just start out of nowhere. It's kind of a pattern that rotates and revolves over time. And I'm really interested to understand at what point growing up did you start to recognise that food was more than just something to meet your hunger?
It probably started very early on. I mean, since going to Slimming World, I had thought about this stuff a bit more, and I've started to look back and recognise stuff that I was doing. I was always a fussy eater. I followed my mum like that. She was very fussy as well. She didn't like certain foods, and mine was just vegetables, so it meant I was eating a lot of carbs, which isn't necessarily a problem. But I found that I was eating takeaways too often, even as a kid. I looked forward to that very much so. And like sweets, sweets were a treat. But one of the things, like looking back, I think didn't help me was my mum and dad bought a wee sweet shop, and I started like working in it and doing paper runs in it for them, delivering papers to the houses. And I always had sweets with me, always had sweets when I was out and about. So because we had access to them, they were just always there. So I think I started using them very early as comfort if I was feeling a wee bit down or a wee bit lonely, out and about for a couple of hours delivering papers. It just, a bag of sweets and a sugary drink were very helpful. So I think honestly, my relationship with food started forming then, the problems with food, but it developed from there. I think mainly because I just didn't know how to look after myself. I had no knowledge of how to eat properly, and I myself that my fussiness with food was a lifelong issue. It wasn't my fault because other people had it as well. So
right. So when you talk about being a fussy eater and recognising that, and knowing that your mum was also a fussy eater, in terms of your meal and the takeaway from a young age, what did your plate look like? Was your plate full of carbs? Was your plate full of salty food? How did your plate look at a young age?
Salty and carbs, basically.
Right. Good guess.
Saturday evening treat. We used to go up to my grand's, my mum's mum, and we had soup, and mine was more potato than soup, and I added lots of salt to it. That was for lunch, and then for dinner it was always takeaway from the fish and chip shop. So it was always a fish supper, and it wasn't a child's portion either. It was a fish supper, a large fish supper. So, and again, it's deep fried. It's lots of salt added. So, and that's exactly what the plate looked like. And I really, really looked forward to that every single week.
That's it, isn't it? When you get together with your family. I've got a similar story with my granddad when we used to visit, but I refused to eat the fish and chips from the fish and chip shop. So my mum and my aunts would all go there and get this fish and chip dinner. But I demanded fish fingers and mashed potato because I couldn't stand, even at a young age, I couldn't stand the smell of fat. But I too, like you, I had a really sweet tooth. And to think about a child having access to a full sweet shop, I mean, that is kind of living the dream, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was a big film when I was growing up, and that to me must have been so difficult to not reach out. How can you not? When I'd imagine like your friends would get so much money for food, for treats like sweets, but you had it to hand, full access.
Limitless amount, obviously it wasn't, but it just felt like it, you just, I'm feeling a bit hungry, so there's a whole row of Mars bars there. There was literally jars of sweets behind you in the shelves, so it wasn't good for you. And anywhere you went, the cinema, theatre, you always got sweets.
So your family must have had a love of food to have opened a sweet shop and to recognise the joy that sweets can bring to your life, but at the same time maybe they didn't see maybe the behaviours around food that did develop from going into the sweet shop and having all that access to the foods, and then going to your grand's and having this fish and chip supper, having the takeaways. Did your mum ever stop and say, actually, we need to maybe cut back? Were there any conversations around that? Or was it just, this is how we live, this is how we are, and this is what we eat?
I think my mum had her own issues with weight, so she was up and down quite a bit, but it wasn't something, we did discuss it as a family when I started putting on weight, but my mum would have defended me, as in, she recognised her own bad habits, I think, in me, whereas my dad, it was just a guaranteed row if we started talking about this, because obviously he could see I was putting on a bit of weight, that it was chubbier at times, that was chubbier than my friends, but that was really the start of the issues with food. So it meant then what I started to do was, I think I hid away, so it's sort of secret eating. But as a kid, occasional wee bits. But I think that was problematic, and it was the sort of the start of my problems with food was there. I mean, it wasn't the fact it just combined with the fact that I was a fussy eater already. I really liked deep fried food. I really liked sweets. It was just a combination of things that was a problem growing up. But there's very few photos of me. We weren't a photo taking family, but
No.
there are photos of me where I look a bit slimmer and then I look a bit chubbier. So I was obviously going up and down. And I remember I joined the gym for a year. I did signed up to boxing for a few months. I was never very good at any of these things and lazy. But even then, it was like when I was going to the gym, I mean, I would have went with a friend and we did actually do a workout, and then I would have went home and just rewarded myself. If I was grabbing food, it wasn't good food. So
no, never the good food. You talk about not knowing where to go with meals and where to start. And I understand that you went on to study at university, and I've studied away from home. I went away to study. Student life can be quite interesting. It's supposed to be like one of those times that, you know, you go and study and everything's fantastic, and, you know, you like live the life of like the friends, the friends, you know, sitcom. But it's not always like that, is it? So having gone away to study and being for the first time on your own and being independent to make the choices around food, how was that? Talk me through how that felt and how it actually was in reality.
I had big ideas when I went to university that I literally picked the furthest university away from home. That might just, for me, this was the start of my life. This was the start of my, you know, I've been restricted and living in a small town, but now I'm free. I'm going to, you know, live away. But I just wasn't prepared for it. Plus the fact was, I mean, my grant took 2 months to get through. So I was living on handouts from my parents for the first 2 months. And the biggest issue was I couldn't prepare food cheaply. I had no idea how to cook. I'd never learned how to cook. My mum worked in a bar, and she was a manager of a bar. So she wasn't home to prepare meals. So I'd never learnt at all, never taught in school. So the only thing I knew was tomatoes and pasta and tuna, literally. So I lived off that. But you get bored of that. I mean, after a week of that, and you just get bored of it. So I found I lived directly across the road from a supermarket. And the supermarket, the bad food was cheaper than buying fresh food because I was cooking for one. Well, I was just living off a multi-bag of crisps. They cost absolutely nothing. That's the thing. They were so cheap. And I was just living off junk. And then I was eating in the student union, which I don't know what student unions are like now, but they were cheap as chips, but everything was deep fried.
Deep fried and beige.
They love their beige.
Yeah, I love the beige.
Happiness at all in what I ate. And plus the culture as well is there's a bit of a drinking culture when you're a student. There certainly was if you're an Irish student living abroad like I was. So my parents used to joke whenever they phoned the communal hall telephone, they basically asked, and whoever picked up the phone just basically said, look, he's probably over in the bar. So they went over in the bar, and 9 times out of 10 they'd find me there. Right. So I talked to my parents. So yeah, it was just, I mean, it was great, but it was a disaster in terms of weight because I piled weight on very, very. I mean, I was coming home every term then, so every 4 months. And like my dad would have basically said that he saw me putting on at least a stone every single time I come home. At least a stone. And I was growing out of clothes so quickly, you know, and I didn't have the money to buy them. So I was like just cobbling together clothes wherever I could find them.
Having gone through that experience at university and then recognising that actually you didn't know what you was doing and you couldn't cook and you was living off this food, obviously at some point university comes to an end. How was it at that point that you left university? Did that trigger anything for you to lose the weight?
No, university ended up being a disaster for me because I had moved because I wanted to go abroad, and I'd picked a university that allowed me to study abroad, but it wasn't good. To be honest, I think my mental health sort of deteriorated looking back at it. So I didn't do my final year. I dropped out. I don't even think I finished my exams in the third year. So I just left and went home, and basically I was on the dole for a few months. So again, I had no money. So then when I got a job, it was sedentary. I was working in a video machine arcade. So I was just sitting, giving out change. And it just meant I would just take my wages and go around and buy junk food. Either go to the supermarket around the corner and buy junk food just to eat during the day. Like, again, it was probably comfort eating as much as anything. It wasn't even, by this point, I was almost as big as I ever got. I put on all my weight probably over the space of 3 years and basically lived like that for 25 years from then. So I wasn't in a good place. I wasn't expending more energy because it was, even when I did go out, I was still drinking. I wouldn't have been like an alcoholic, but I would have had a few drinks whenever I did go out. But that didn't help because then you were sort of squeezing in meals. So when I sort of started working, I was running pub quizzes and trivia nights, and I was doing like karaoke nights. So you were living an antisocial hours. So I was away from home all day, wasn't preparing meals, so you just grabbed whatever food you could.
Yeah.
Which meant in bars 4 nights a week at one point. And I mean, even if it's relatively healthy food, restaurant portions are going to be far more than what you're actually expending day to day energy wise. So
it's intense, isn't it? Like you say, you had all these dreams for university. Yeah. You went away as far as you could to start this almost like a new life, and then you're back. I mean, how did you feel having returned back and you live in the same life almost, and then when you left for university, how did that feel for you?
It just felt like a complete failure. I mean, that's the way I felt. I mean, it had sort of been kind of ground down by the negativity of the university life. And I wasn't happy at all. But you just put that mask on of, happiness for your friends and family. But again, by this point, I wasn't eating meals with my family because even when I started work, I wasn't at home. I was away because I was literally going from work to a pub to quiz. Yeah. And they never saw me eating. And even if they did see me eating, they would have known that it wasn't healthy. But by this point, I wasn't putting on anymore, mate. I was as heavy as I was ever got, really. I mean, I'm sure it fluctuated a few stone either way. And every so often I would try and do something about it. But that was always a disaster as well. So
I don't know. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, how that would have felt on a daily basis for you, and what kind of self-talk you would have given yourself at that point.
I think probably more than anything, it was just hiding from the issues. I mean, I didn't directly address it. I certainly would never have discussed it with my friends and family. If it was ever brought up, I'm the only person in my family who ever brought it up. Dad. It was a guaranteed blazing row within 20 seconds of it even being raised, because I would have just got up and walked out, or he would have got up and walked out, and it was just, I just wasn't comfortable addressing it at all. No. And my friend kind of knew, they kind of formed, I was always very lucky. I had very good friends, I must admit, and I had a pretty good circle of friends with being and spending so much time in bars. Because obviously there's the ones that work there and people who sort of habituate in it. And I was very lucky with them, but they knew enough that they wouldn't really mention it. They also warned people off mentioning it to me because they knew I would change the topic of conversation. And if someone kept mentioning it, I would just cut them out of my life. Yeah. I would go or see them again or talk to them again. I wouldn't have confronted it. I only ever confronted one person about it and basically told him never to talk to me again about it. But that's the way it was. And I mean, it helped me because they were very supportive of me, but it kind of insulated me from dealing with it myself. So,
what was the fear? What was the fear of actually talking about it to your friends, to your family? I mean, family, obviously, and anything that involves, I guess, your children being hurt, you're really protective, aren't you? So I'd imagine that for a father, they can see the fact that this weight is going on, and they're wanting to intervene out of love. And obviously there's that tough love that can sometimes come through, especially, I guess, from a father to son relationship. But what was the fear? Talk me through the fear of having those conversations. You've got your friends approaching you, you've got your family, but you're cutting them down.
For me, it was just pure embarrassment. I mean, I couldn't deny I had a problem. I knew it was food. I knew I didn't eat healthy. But it was just the embarrassment of it. I think it's a form of self-loathing. I mean, and then food I used as not only an emotional crutch, but I used it to punish myself. Like, occasionally you'd get shouted abuse at in the street by random strangers. Just random fat shaming. Like, sometimes I've read about, I was inspired by that, but it wasn't. It just, anytime that happened to me, I was just mortified. Particularly if I was with someone, and I would just go straight back and eat, because the eat, it would fill that emotional hole. It felt like it at the time, but it absolutely wasn't, and I know that now, but it did feel like it, that it was a comfort to me. But I mean, it's just a spiral, so you really do.
And I think for somebody like yourself that has lost 22 stone, and I hear everything that you've said, and I totally can relate with everything that you've said. And I guess, luckily for me, touch wood, my weight hasn't got to a point where I've got such an amount to lose. What I really thought about before this interview was, I know the struggle of losing weight. And I know the struggle of losing a bit of weight and then putting a bit of weight back on. And I know the struggle of losing quite a lot of weight and then getting compliments and then thinking, actually, I can relax it a bit. But to even begin to think that you've lost such an amount of weight that you would have lost 5 stone, and then you would have had thoughts around that, you would have lost 10 stone, just so incredible. So at what point did you yourself make that connect to take action? Because obviously it wasn't from your friends trying to get through to you or your family. So did something happen for you to decide to take some action?
I mean, it's a whole combination, really, to me, because I was having problems with my knees, and I'd been having them for years. I blew the cartilage out in one of my knees, and I was on heavy duty, like a steroid, basically, to stop the inflammation in them. And I tried then. Now that was, I think, I don't even remember, because it was so long ago, that when I tried and failed, that was the first step, because I started to realise that for years I kidded myself that it wasn't impacting my life physically, because I wasn't driving anyway. I'd never learned to drive. I didn't need to. I wouldn't have bought a car even if I could have driven, because I was living right beside a train station, and I worked pretty close to a train station, so it was just easier. But there's just the whole thing combined. So I had my knee issues that weren't getting any better. I couldn't walk anywhere. I couldn't stand upright for any more than 20 minutes, half an hour at a time, without my knees being really, really sore. And I would pay for that for days afterwards. So it just meant I couldn't go to concerts, I couldn't fit in seats in a venue, a theatre, or anything like that. So I stopped doing that. I just stopped doing lots of stuff. What I ended up doing was once a week, twice a week, I would go down to the bar and I would grab a seat at the bar, because I couldn't stand. And my friends would kind of then gravitate to me rather than anything else. So my life was just the quality of life was just getting worse and worse. Then there was a male friend of mine, Kenny, he had joined up with Slimming World, and I knew what he ate, because he ate the same rubbish I did. We shared lots of meals. He worked in a sweet shop at one point.
Okay.
At one point as well, completely separate ones from when I did. But he had put on a lot of weight as well. But so he had started doing well, and it was kind of like I knew what he ate. So part of me was starting to think, if he could do it, maybe I can. Like, I'd tried before. I'd went to the doctors and joined up with a dietitian, and I'd failed immediately because it was once a month you got support from it, and that wasn't enough because I didn't want to involve my friends. I didn't want my family to know. So that contact wasn't enough for me. I needed that sort of network support around me. But when I started opening up to my friends, so first Kenny, and then I had another friend, Laura, who wanted to join. So I think once I started opening up to my friends, that's when I started, I think, getting ready, whether it was in my head or whether to actually do something about it. And then the final factor definitely was my mum fell ill again. My mum had been ill several times. She had diagnosed with cancer and went into remission and then diagnosed again. Every time I heard, I did something about it, and then I would fail, I would drop off and put any weight I'd lost back on immediately. Never big changes, by the way. These were all sort of maybe a couple of stone. But you also mentioned about when people notice that you've done really well. One of my worst ones was I knew I'd fallen off the wagon, and I knew I was starting to, the bad habits had started returning. But people were saying, it's like, God, you're looking really well. I haven't seen you in a couple of months. You've definitely lost a few stone. I had no idea how much I'd lost because I didn't even know where to get weighed. Because where do you get weighed at that sort of weight? You couldn't go in boots and stand in one of those go machines. There's that, the embarrassment factor of that alone would have just stopped me doing that. But yeah, my mum falling ill, opening up to my friends, Kenny and Laura, talking about the problems I was having with my weight. I think it just got me ready to a point where, even though in my head it was just, it wouldn't work and I would fail again, I think it just got me ready to do something finally about it.
And it's ironic that the very thing that you'd been pushing back on, help from your friends, just seeing, that friend have success and have, I guess, a similar life to you, so much so that, we worked in a sweet shop, could see you in his own slimming journey, I guess. What a thankful experience to have that you was able to see that and to make those changes. I'm really interested to know the next part of your journey. What happened when you decided to take that action and you walked through the doors of your local weight loss group?
Well, I was talking it over with Laura, and she had picked out a group that would sort of, I couldn't join Kenny's group because they met at like 10 o'clock in the morning in Bangor, and I was working in Belfast until 6 o'clock at night. So I'd mentioned that to Laura, and Laura had went and found a group so that suited. It was like 7:30 on a Monday night. So we just kind of decided, and it was just, right, we met up for dinner beforehand because obviously you have one last blowout. That it was. So we went up and walked through the doors. Even then, I was convinced that this isn't for me. Yes, she'd warned me of the format of it, about the image therapy. She did say, look, this might be a bit happy clappy for you. I think she knew exactly how I was about stuff like that. So, and it was just a case of, well, we'll give it a go anyway. My first question to the consultant, Lindsay, who was there, was, I actually said, look, I have no idea what I weigh. Can I ask how far these scales go up to? Because it's a terrible story. It really is a terrible story. The only idea I'd ever had about how much I weighed was when I went to the doctors, and the doctor brought in a set of scales, and the scales went up to 20 stone. So I stood on them, and obviously they just pinged straight to the limit. So he said, look, I don't have a set of scales that weigh any bigger than that. So what he went and did was he went and got another set of 20 stone scales, and I stood with 1 foot on one set and 1 foot on another. And he said, this is accurate, but if you even it out, which should be able to guess at what it was. And right enough, one of them was like 17 stone, one of them was 18 stone. So he basically said, look, you're probably in the round. I don't know how this worked, but all I remember about it was I was absolutely mortified, the embarrassment. I could not wait to get out of that place. So I knew I was at least 35 stone probably. So I asked her what they went up to, and I think she said 50 stone. So I thought, oh, probably okay. But I thought it would be in around 40 stone. So when I stepped on the scales, I was actually, this is weird, it was actually kind of pleasantly surprised that it was only 37 stone, which is, I mean, looking back, it's bizarre, but like kind of relieved that it wasn't more. I think it was that it was slightly less than I was expecting. Now, very, very slightly less, but I do think part of it was just the relief of knowing of, like, well, that's where I am. Like that doctor's experience, that was at least 10 years before that. So that's why I know I was roughly in around my biggest size for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Then the next experience on the actual thing was, you have to, obviously, for anybody who's a Slim and Aware member, or I'm assuming it's the same in other weight loss groups, is you sit there and you have to wait. You weigh at the very end, so you have to sit through the image therapy. You get the new members talk. So it was in the seats, the plastic seats, and my first thought was, I'm going to break that, because I'd broken work seats. So I was genuinely worried, and I do remember, like, even sitting down on it, trying to be as gentle as I could, because you know, that's the sort of scale I was. You know, these are things where, unless you're that size, there's not many of us who get to that size and then actually do something about it successfully. But if you are that size, you do become conscious of all of these things. These wee are inconveniences that wouldn't even occur to most people, like sitting in a seat with arms. If I was with work and going to a training course, I requested a seat without arms, because I was, where I carry my weight, I still do, where I carry my weight is my hips and my thighs. So if I'm constricted on it, I can't sit comfortably. So, and you can't sit comfortably for 8 hours in a seat that you're not comfortable in.
So, you know, credit to you. You walk through those doors and you've got all of this. You're just carrying all of this, you know, irrespective of your weight. You've got all these stories in your head. With the scales, take my weight, would the chair support me, friends saying it was too happy clappy. You've got all of this going around, and yet you still walk through that door, which is amazing. And I understand what your friend means by happy clappy, and often these groups are filled with lots of women, and it's very, I totally get you. And if you're not used to talking about, I would say, your emotions, because often, and I'll just explain this for people who aren't aware of how slimming group works, or in particular Slimming World. You go to the group, you'll get weighed, and you sit around and we talk about how your week's been. And then sometimes, you know, you talk about how your week's been, and maybe you've had an emotional week, something's happened, and then, you know, people will cry in group. People will, you know, tell their life stories, often in group. And it's almost like a family in a way, because you get to know one another's stories, don't you? And how was it for you? So you've gone to group, you've got weighed, and you've had your first week, and then it's your turn. How was that moment of being in the spotlight?
I was very lucky, because when I started, I still couldn't cook. So Laura had made all these meals and basically given me one of each of them. She had been in Slimming World before. She knew exactly what she was going to do, tackle it, do all the batch cooking, the prepping, and so she gave me one of each of her meals and basically said, look, try them. Don't worry about what you're eating. Just try and eat healthily. Have that for your dinner each day. She gave me like overnight oats as a breakfast as well, which I loved, which absolutely amazed me. It was the first thing I tried. It was just like, well, this is delicious.
Yeah.
You know, I have that. You know, I could eat that. And like all the meals now, like she knew what I ate. So she basically made like chilies, spaghetti bolognese, all the stuff. There was beef and red wine that I remember with mashed potato. And she'd hidden all the vegetables in it. So she'd like basically blended mustard onion the way through them, and you wouldn't even have known they were there. So she actually gave me then the list of ingredients, but I ate them all. And there was a couple of wasn't that fussed on, but so I did my dinners. Then for lunches, I basically had soup, which I would have had normally. It was a tomato soup, and then lentil and bacon soup. So that did me the entire week. And then I do remember going back the next Monday, and it was the case of, well, like, I mean, didn't really feel any different. And I was also conscious that I'd written everything down, but I'd also some crisps and biscuits in work, and it was a case of, well, I'm not throwing them out, that's a waste. So I did like ration them, but I would have had like a bag of crisps with like a small bag of I remember one of them was McCoy's. So I had a 6-pack of them, so I had like 3 bags left, so I had 3 of them during the week, and then I had some biscuits, so I rationed them out as one a day. So I went back and was like, well, I think I've eaten pretty well, but I've never been hungry. It was the bit that amazed me. It was like, I was never hungry. If I was hungry, I ate. But it was just basically advised, fill up with whatever fruit you have. So I just ate, I think I had about 30 apples that week. It was a ridiculous point. But I stood in the skills, and I'd lost 11.5 pounds the first week, which was like, that blew my mind. It was just like, really? I mean, anybody who's done Slimming World will know that if you follow the plan, you will have a great result in the first week, particularly if you go and absolutely stuff yourself before you weigh the first time anyway, which we did. We went out, force blowout. It was seeing the result immediately was just like, well, it was a real bonus. It was a real buzz from it.
Yeah.
Obviously, they announced that now in the group, and everybody really, I mean, yes, it was the only man in it, but I was the only man who stayed. There was 2 or 3 men who came through and weighed and went straight away, but I was the only man who stayed, and it was just a case of like, I'll give this a go. But I actually surprised how much I enjoyed it. And you talk about you mentioned about you do the format of you get invested in other people's stories. Other people immediately invested in mine as well, so I definitely felt that sort of community from it, which is weird because my friend Laura still absolutely hated it. She still hates the format, but I actually found that I enjoyed it, and I definitely got ideas from it, and I think that's where it was key for me, because when I've talked about going to a community dietitian before, and you were basically given a 7-day menu, it was explained in some word that it was more flexible, and that there's nothing off plan, nothing off menu, there's nothing, but you have to make up your own what you want to eat. I think that flexibility was just a massive thing for me, but definitely the community aspect of it, because you got feedback immediately, which you from the dietitian, because you saw them a month later and you were in for 10 minutes and then out again. So
doesn't work, does it? That doesn't work, and it's about behaviours and changing behaviours, and straight away, you've got that support from your friend, which is fantastic, and I guess for the first time, would you say that was the first time ever that you actually ate a nutritionally balanced meal?
I mean, I would have had the odd one occasionally, probably by accident, but yeah, certainly. The only time I would have had like 5 main meals during the day, like during the week, sorry, not 5 main meals a day, where I would have had like all of the meals would have been pretty healthy. Yeah, definitely. So like I noticed after 3 weeks, the difference in energy of how I felt as a result of that, because I was just eating better. So after that first week, all the crisps and the biscuits were gone, and I didn't replace them. I didn't buy the wee hi-fi bars or any sort of low-fat snacks that they all talk about. I went cold turkey on them. But after 3 weeks, it felt amazing. It really was. It was bizarre. The energy levels just went through the roof. And it was, I mean, I'm still, at this point, I'm 35 stone, 35 stone plus, but I couldn't get over how alert and sharp my mind was compared to where I was 3 weeks beforehand. I mean, my sleeping pattern completely changed in the space of 3 weeks. I went from going to sleep at 1 o'clock in the morning, struggling to get out of bed at 8:30 to get into work, to I would have woken up at 6:30, and it was, as soon as I woke up, I felt awake. Whereas before it would have been snooze button again to try and sort of wake up in installments. And I would have had like 3 alarms all around to try and force out of bed.
Wow, what can I say? What can you say to that, you know? There's many people that will say, okay, diets don't work. In particular, things like Weight Watchers and Slimming World, they don't work. People lose the weight, then they put the weight back on. Phil, it's testament to show that it does work. It does work. And like with any weight loss plan, any diet, it's the same for every weight loss regime, that it doesn't necessarily matter how the plan works, whether you're following keto, Atkins, Slimming World, any of those plans. It starts with what you decide to commit to in your mind. The process of change does not happen on your plate. The process of change starts from you deciding that you're in control and you're not going to let food control you anymore. That's where the process of change starts. And I'm so glad that Phil's been able to come on here and share his story. It's such a hero's journey, and it's turned his life around. So I hope this has inspired you into Monday. Every Sunday I publish a podcast episode, and Monday comes around, and Monday's that day where often people will be, right, okay, I'm on it, I've got a new week, I'm on it. But what I would ask you is, what have you put in place to be on plan? What changes have you committed to make sure that your week has got your focus to get the results when you step on that scales, or when you measure, or when you step into those jeans that you're wanting to fit for summer? There needs to be something that changes, as simple as that. If you do the same as what you did the week before that, the month before that, the year before that, there's going to be no change. It starts with taking action and deciding that food isn't in control. You can be in control of that food. And look what Phil's done. Just look what he's done. Over 21.5 stone, absolutely amazing. So proud of him, so pleased. And I know this is going to inspire you. I mean, goodness, this is just, yeah, it's on another level, isn't it, of inspiration. Have a great week. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you follow the link in my show notes, you will see that I've now got a Facebook group. Click on that link. I would love to see you in there. There's lots of changes coming up for me this month in particular, and I'll tell you all about those very, very soon. But come into the group. I would love to see you there. Until next time, have a great week and take care.